Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent podcast. Today, we are sitting down with Dr. Janiel L. Dr. Janiel is the CEO, founder, and clinical director at Women's Rise Psychological and Wellness Center, located in Southern California. Women Rise is a boutique psychological and wellness center specializing in women's mental health and wellness across the lifespan, with services including psychotherapy, clinical functional nutrition, women's wellness practitioner, doula support, massage therapy, and yoga movement, thereby targeting the whole person. As a licensed psychologist, Dr. Henry works to empower women so that they may not only survive, but heal, grow, thrive, and rise in every aspect of their lives. Dr. Henry, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Marissa. And with your audience, it's so awesome to be here, especially talking about these topics. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm curious, how do you conceptualize what we call codependency?
So codependency, over the years, it's been defined in many different ways. But one of the ways that we love to conceptualize it is it's really a description of a pattern of behavior,
Right.
where someone's consistently putting someone else's needs above their own in a way that's detrimental to that person.
Mm.
So it's really a dynamic we're looking at.
Right.
It's not necessarily a disorder or anything like that, but more of a description of problematic behavior, which may have a lot of different underpinnings, right? Depending on the person.
Say more about underpinnings.
Yeah. So why someone may exhibit codependent behavior is going to have a different reason. Perhaps maybe for them, it's their attachment, right? So maybe for them, having to be there for that other person and consistently looking after that other person's needs, maybe for them was a way to receive love or approval or a survivor strategy, right? For maybe childhood trauma. But maybe for someone else, it could just be the way that they find their worth, right? And their meaning. And so each person that exhibits that codependent behavior, it's going to look different for them.
Right. Different underpinnings of that. So, a description of a pattern of behavior as opposed to what traditionally in psychology has been a description of a certain relationship, right? Like the old example is an alcoholic husband and his codependent wife. But
Yes.
what I'm hearing from your definition, right, description of a pattern, is it really can be or is a pattern that might, focusing on women, it might be with a parent, with a partner, with a child. It's not like the old traditional wife and husband
dynamic.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So it's a little bit more expansive than that. And so
Yeah.
when I'm speaking of that problematic behavior, I'm speaking about it in the context of a relationship, any interpersonal relationship. Like you mentioned, whether that be a child or a partner, any of those would be considered a relationship, an interpersonal relationship, friendships,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Oh, codependency and friendships. Yes.
So we can
Okay.
see it across the board.
Yes. All right. Well, in preparation for today, speaking of across the board, we decided to focus on codependency across the board, across the lifespan,
Mm-hmm.
while also regarding the clinical considerations. So I'm hoping we can talk about lifespan and then we'll touch on clinical considerations following this. So, Dr. Janelle, how do you differentiate what codependency looks like for adolescents, young women, and new moms? We'll start with those phases. Adolescence.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, it can look different, right, across each person, but then also with those developmental considerations as well.
Right.
So, when we think about adolescence in general, that time period, there is a lot of development happening when it comes to individual identity versus group identity, right? Fostering those relationships in that time period are really, really important because there's that development happening. And so
Right.
when we think about codependency in adolescence, we might see that the behavior may be a little bit less overt, right? So as a parent or a friend, you might see some signs that this codependent behavior is happening, right?
Right.
Maybe this teen, maybe your child, or maybe a friend of yours is really frequently feeling really bad, in a bad mood, feeling really sad or let down, or just feeling really exhausted. And maybe if you ask them about it, it's a certain relationship dynamic that they're experiencing with a friend or a partner,
Mm.
right? And because that development of identity and group belonging is so strong, it may be a little bit more challenging to recognize for that teen or that adolescent that this problematic behavior is happening, this dynamic, right?
Mm.
Because it's such a big part of their identity, right?
Right.
The belonging and the identity in their friend group, right? Or what maybe what others may think of them if they
Right.
change that behavior. And also, when we think about the adolescent brain, it's still developing, right? So when
Right.
we think about like the emotion focused part versus like the decision making, there's so many elements to that that can make it really difficult to recognize when this relationship dynamic may be problematic or
Right.
unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think along those lines, it also goes back to the way that oftentimes young children are socialized, right? We hear, oh, if little girls be nice, right? And so maybe when we get to the teen years, we take on those messages that this is what I'm supposed to do, right? I'm supposed to be the caretaker in my friendships. I'm
Right.
supposed to be the one that is sacrificing, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
internalize that as a teen. Even if it's problematic messaging, I may still internalize it.
Yeah.
And then when I get
This,
that message, it's hard.
yeah, so hard. Yeah, as you're talking, I'm trying to go back to my 7th and 8th grade friendships, which, yeah, at times were very unhealthy overall, very
Mhm.
unhealthy.
Yeah.
And yet, mm, I don't know if I was able to articulate well how I was feeling about them. And also, I sense there is the encouragement from TV shows
Mm-hmm.
and from family and from other friends, like just to call, to reach out, to not take it personally. to, I don't know, like kill them with kindness and, hope for the best, when really it is a relationship that undermines, my value and time and energy. So other thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a great point, right? Those messages that we get, and that time period is, okay, be the bigger person.
Mm.
Oh, maybe they didn't mean it that way. And so as you're exploring during that time period, you want to really take a step back and ask, is this a pattern for me?
Mm.
Right? Do I often feel undermined and undervalued in this friendship? Because others in our lives may not always see all the other aspects to the relationship, especially nowadays with being online and screen time so much, right?
Right.
What's really happening on
Right.
these online platforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't always see
Yeah.
that.
Right. What's really happening? Yeah, and I sense too, I haven't thought this through, but I would argue that in adolescence, of course, young girls can be codependent unknowingly with their parents. But I think that would, again, I think asking like, are there patterns here? What's really going on is important to ask then. But it's hard when there is true dependency happening at that time as well. So yeah, I would argue that the seeds of codependency could start to be planted, yes, in dating relationships, but like you said, because those social bonds and friendships are so paramount at that time, that the seeds of codependency really start to sprout, with friends.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big part developmentally, right?
Yes. Yeah. Any other thoughts on what codependency can look like during that phase?
Yeah, so thinking about behavior wise, if it's not so overt, right, where you're able to just see it directly, keeping an eye out for specific signs, for example, withdrawal and isolation, low mood, depressive symptoms, high levels of anxiety, recurrent narrative about some of these friendships or people in their life,
Mm.
and the things that are happening within them, right? That might raise a couple of flags.
What kind of flags?
Yeah, flags such as maybe this teen is in a possibly abusive relationship or possibly in a relationship that is unbalanced,
Mm.
where really
Yeah.
it's all about the other person and not about them. And that's
Mm-hmm.
hard to see sometimes, right? Especially as a teen.
Yeah.
So
Very,
being
very hard to see.
aware,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, being aware of how do I feel in this relationship? Right? What's the pattern? How frequently does this happen? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That could be really helpful.
Right. Okay. And as this budding codependent potentially continues through life, what does codependency, I'm curious, do you want to specify with teens, or move on and really just categorize like young women?
Yeah, we can move along.
Okay.
Um, as we get older, right, and we develop more of like our identities and our brains start to develop a little bit more, at times, if we have been reinforced in our behaviors in the sense that we all have needs that need to be met, right? We all need love and connection. And so if I've developed a pattern of codependent behavior and it's gotten my needs met, then it's likely that as I get older, I'm going to continue the behavior that's been working in some
Mm,
respects, right?
right.
And
In
so,
some respects.
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
in some respects, and what I mean by that is I may be receiving love and connection, in a codependent relationship, at the same time, there may be an expense to that.
Right.
Because now my needs aren't being met.
Mm-hmm.
But I get the message sometimes that, oh, don't be selfish, or this is what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's harder in these moments that I'm getting what exactly I need, but not fully, right? It comes at a cost.
Right. And what does that look like in young women?
Yeah. So for example, right, we look at how frequently is this person asking you to show up for them, right? And how much is it about them, and how much is it that they're actually showing up for you? So
Right.
if they're constantly needing help, or they're in these situations, or you're in a bind and you're helping them get out of it, let's say they're using a lot, or let's say you're a student, or like maybe a college student, and they're consistently missing classes or getting into trouble, and you're really covering for them in a way that puts you out in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a good example. And that's not
Right.
for everyone, but for some people that can happen that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So overall, I'm hearing a over functioning in relationships, potentially with friends, partner, and an under functioning with said friends or partners.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking at one's voice too, and articulating that, am I heard? Am I listened to? Right? Do I have difficulty setting boundaries?
Right.
And what comes up for this person when they do, especially as a young adult?
Mm-hmm.
Because for young women, even though they're older, still developing, still growing, still solidifying those identities.
Right. So over functioning, potential difficulty using their voice, raising their voice, setting boundaries,
Mhm.
and any other signals or ways you observe codependency during this phase.
Yeah, a sense of identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does this young person consider themselves to be as an individual?
Mm-hmm.
If it's difficult for them to identify that, what are their likes, needs, wants, dreams? In their relationship, it's hard to identify that. Then
Right.
maybe that might be a signal that there could be some codependency happening, right, in this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we might hear in our practice, specifically someone of this age might say, well, I don't even know, like, what do I like? Because for so long, it's been about this person in my life,
Right.
or these people, that I've never really taken a look at my own to see what do I actually want?
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was in undergrad, maybe even grad school, and I don't know, maybe I was taking like a career class or something future oriented, and the professor would ask a simple question like, who are you? I remember like having a visceral reaction like,
Mhm.
I don't know who I am. God, like,
Mm,
don't pick on me. I literally have no thought, or I don't know. If I got called on, I probably would have been able to say something. But yeah, just really feeling ungrounded.
yeah,
Um,
it's a big question, right?
yeah, not a lot of reflection with that. I'm sure, again, I had a lot of things that I did. I had certain characteristics I could have said, and yet I did spend so much time thinking about other people that, yeah, I hadn't really thought much about myself.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
right.
It's such a good example because that's something that we see comes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes where has the space even been for there to be space to identify that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in some situations, it's not always there,
No.
especially when caring for someone, even growing up, maybe
Mm-hmm.
with an illness or addiction.
Yeah. Who are you?
Yes, big question. You're like, that's,
Yeah.
that's a great question.
Mm-hmm. So sense of identity, right, difficulty expressing, using their voice. Oh, and what else did I put here? Yeah, over functioning in relationships. Any other thoughts come to mind for this phase of life and codependency?
No, I think you pretty much covered that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I know we talked about over functioning, under functioning, codependency, especially in adolescence, potentially, yeah, with friends. And then, yeah, I would argue the ways I've witnessed it manifest during this phase. Yes, with friends. Yes, with partners. I think with partners, that might be the it is like the traditional perspective on codependency, right? Like a heteronormative male female relationship. And I think that's what brings like most of my patients into therapy. It's either like they're in a relationship or they just broke up and ended one and they come. But I think, yeah, I think a lot of listeners are dealing with codependent, like, yeah, dating relationships. But I also see it a lot with professors, with bosses. So it also sometimes, like during this phase of life, can be with an authority. Yeah, while you're starting young adulthood, no longer under the authority of your parents. And yeah, I've just seen like in my own experience and others, like, oh wow, like I'm really codependent with my boss. So
That
just something. Go
work
ahead.
environments. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Right. Especially when maybe there's been other situations where it's been reinforced
Yes.
that, okay, you need approval to please, to get that feedback, maybe consistent feedback, constant reassurance. And that can really manifest in work, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm performing, but what does my boss think, right? How am I doing? What's my performance? And maybe not in all situations, but maybe in one situation, it can attract or draw that, okay, I'm going to continue to ask you to do this, and this. And then it goes on and on. And then that person feels burnt out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they want that approval of
Right.
that authority in their lives.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So moving on into the phase of motherhood. Janelle, what does codependency look like in new moms?
Yeah, so this time period is such a shift, right? We've been talking about all these shifts and entering into motherhood in that identity, there's a lot of pressures and expectations, right? So many expectations to be a good mom, right?
Mm.
To take care of your children, right? If in a relationship, to take care of your partner. Right? And so for some new moms, maybe they can feel lost sometimes in the caregiving role
Mm.
and find it really difficult in general to take time for themselves. And what we know as far as stress response oftentimes for women, when overwhelmed and stressed, they may have the tendency to tend and befriend, just pouring themselves and caring even more for those people in their life. And so it's really complicated because as a new mom, yes, you want to take care of your child, your family. You might have that natural drive, right? And that biological wiring, right? And at the same time, if I lean into that overly and I use it only as my sense of self approval, identity, and I get lost in that, then my behavior sometimes can become unhealthy or problematic, where at the sense that it's only about others and not about me.
Right.
And so one of the things that we'd love to share in our practice and in our center in general is that you taking care of you gives you the opportunity to give from the overflow.
Mm-hmm.
And that you can both be you while at the same time doing these roles as well.
Right.
Even though your identity shifts and there's some things, yes, you give up that change. But at the same time, we can do both and.
Mm-hmm.
Do both and.
Yeah.
And so I just want to share that just for our listeners who may be struggling with that and all the messaging and expectations that society puts and we put on ourselves as new moms, is that it's okay to take care of myself as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is interesting. Your point that during this transition, this stressful time, is stressful, that potentially as a coping skill, we can regress to old behaviors that, right, to tend and befriend. I really appreciate that perspective because, yeah, in times of stress, we do tend to regress. And one of those ways, yeah, for new moms, despite how tired, fatigued, sleep deprived, exhausted, etc., right, intellectually, this new mom and everybody knows this is not the time to tend and befriend other people. And yet emotionally, right, part of us, it's yeah, if it is a behavior pattern, like that's instilled. And yeah, we might regress to taking care of everybody else. Mm-hmm.
Even when we're depleted.
Right.
So that stress, that burnout, it's very real, and not just in a psychological, intellectual perspective, but physiologically, right? Our nervous systems are just crying out across the board for rest and restoration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts on, I know we're talking about some of the ways, yeah, you've observed codependency, and then I'm also adding like the potential relationships where that might be most poignant during that phase. So during new motherhood, right? Obviously, I mean, I'm curious, like, how do you see or how have you observed codependency potentially on the child, on the partner, with parents, with in-laws? And I just had someone come on, but I would love to touch on it again, like with like mom friends. What stands out for relationships that they can be codependent in?
Yeah. So you mentioned the one that I'm thinking about, for example, like with the child, right? When we skip, of course, your baby, your child is dependent on you, right? To survive, to live. And we also see that in some cases, as the child gets older, as you're raising them, as they become teens, as they become adults, it can be hard to separate this sense of identity, me, from them, right? Because in some situations, once becoming a mother, that sense of identity, right, into that, it can be easy to get lost in it. So now that I have my child, now I'm fully taking care of them, right? So my own sense of identity and self gets a little bit to the wayside. And then now that dynamic can play out with my child, right?
Right.
Even if I'm doing everything and love and care about them, and it's not problematic in a sense of loving and caring about my child, but how much is it about my child versus my own needs too? Is my child also learning, okay, mom has boundaries. Mom loves and cares about me. And at the same time, mom is their own person.
Right.
And so mom's needs matter too.
Right.
And if my child gets the messaging that it's all about them, only about them and not about me at all, it can give that message that can perpetuate for them as well. Well, this is how relationships are.
Right. So I'm hearing tons of repercussions, right? Different ones potentially, but yeah, just it's I don't want to pathologize, right, every single mother-child dynamic. And at the same time, with anything, it's a spectrum, and we can be healthier or unhealthier in relationships. We can be codependent, interdependent, independent. Yeah, we don't want a lot of independence between new moms and their children. We want lots of interdependence, but really, yeah, dependence is part of the process. But if that dependency persists, yeah, without a right, like a slow separation of those boundaries. Because yeah, when my nephew was born, he was on my sister every 2 hours.
Yes.
Like mom did not have
Natural.
any physical boundary. Like really, it was like her body was his. And but right, over time, yeah, if mentally, if emotionally, physically, the separation does not commence, then yeah, I'm hearing that there really can be long-term consequences for moms who, yeah, over-identify with that role.
Yeah. And you said the word that is so important, right? Interdependence.
Right.
We want to be careful with that messaging, particularly in like the Western US culture, like individualistic, right? It's all about, you do it yourself, right? And understand that context that some cultures are more collectivistic, right? That it's us as a family, as a unit, and we don't want to pathologize that, right? And so that interdependence is so important, because you can have that relationship and maintain it, even if it looks a little bit different in each situation. But is it problematic, right?
Right.
Is it leading to negative consequences?
Right. Yeah, I really appreciate these questions you're also asking too during these phases to ask or reflect on. And this one, you said, how much is it about my child, or how much is it about my own needs? And right, like asking, like, is this problematic? And I actually know I have a friend who the nap schedule of a family member's child was really getting in the way of the cohesion of the family. And so my friend actually said, like when is this going to change? And she did it in a manner that was more indirect and passive, and the context wasn't the best, but she was saying, unfortunately, too, what everybody else had been talking about, but had neglected to tell the mom. And yeah, there was a lot of conflict around that, which was unfortunate, but yeah, I think on paper it looked like this mom is really honoring her child's need to nap. But then asking, like, but is it problematic? And yeah, the evidence was clear that it was. And so trying to find that balance, I think in between, yeah, the child's need for sleep, the family's need for cohesion. Yeah. So those, yeah, they really are so important to ask and keep asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on codependency, what that can look like during the face of new motherhood, or yeah, we're kind of hearing motherhood in general.
Yeah, so like we said earlier, just really taking some time for mom, having that space for mom care is just as important. I think that's something that we need to talk about more and more and just reiterate, because when you have a new baby, everybody's like, how's the baby? Let me see the baby. Let me stop in on the baby, right? And then sometimes mom is kind of, not really taken care of in the same way. And so,
No.
right, moms also need support. They need care, in practical ways, right? Emotionally, but also in practical ways.
Yeah. I'm nodding and making weird faces, everybody, if you're listening, in agreement, because one time, this is fairly recently, my nephew just turned 1, and I've talked about this before, I'll say it again, but his birth has revolutionized how I perceive moms and mothering, even the field of psychology. I've talked about it on the show. Like, so much of psychology is about the importance of mothers and mothering and, the good enough mother or whatever. But that's all like dudes perceiving mothers through their male lens. So I'm not going to go to my feminist rant, but still, it's been a revolution this past year. And yeah, like the outpouring of support for this little guy has been so amazing, from myself, from other family members. But recently, yeah, talking about like not acknowledging moms, two thoughts come to mind. So we went to dinner one time, my husband, myself, brother-in-law, and sister, and the baby was sleeping. The three of us all own our own businesses, and my sister's a college professor. So we were talking about like, oh, how's your business? Like the entrepreneurial world that we're all in. And none of us asked Elena, like, how's your business raising a child? And she had to say, she's like, no one asked me about how work's going for me. Right? I have a full-time job raising this human.
100%. Absolutely.
Oops.
Right?
And then more recently, I remember I texted her because I had a free morning, and I didn't want to see the baby. Also wanted to see her, but I texted her and I was like, hey, I have a window. I can stop by. She's like, yeah, great. Like, I'll be here. So I went over, walked in, and I was like, hey, and she's like, hey, and like sat down on the couch to talk. And I was like, where's the baby? And she's like, oh, like a grandparent took him or something. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, and I didn't say anything. I didn't say, like, I really came here for the baby. But part of me, I was like, I came here for the baby. So we had a great time. We
Yeah.
connected, which
Yeah.
I
That's
actually
awesome.
need too.
Yeah.
But yeah, mom care is so important, so under talked about
Hmm.
and discussed, and really, yeah, I know I'm preparing for that phase in life, and it's just so undervalued. I can't even
Yeah. Yeah.
express. Yeah.
Yes, and that's what we hear over and over again. It's what we know, from our own experiences in our center, and then also, the messaging that none of us are immune from, right? As the mom, you need to be the martyr for your child
Hmm.
and for your family, right?
Right.
And if
Yeah.
you're not, then you might feel that guilt.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I'm curious, um, hearing about what codependency looks like in these different phases in women, adolescents, young women, new moms. What are the clinical considerations for working with them? And also, before we even answer that, what does clinical consideration mean for the non-therapist listener?
Yeah, things to think about when it comes to working with clients or in
Right.
some settings, patients, where you're meeting with patients, you're meeting with clients, and in their specific case, right, what are the things to think about that you
Right.
might see that might come up? What are the themes? And when we say clinical presentation, right, what is it that this potential client or client is coming in for? What's their goals and objective? What are the things that they're describing in their lives they want support with and are problems for them?
Love it. Okay, everyone, this is the fancy term, clinical considerations, what we consider when working with
Clinically.
someone. Yeah, that's
Yes,
what
yes.
we're considering. We're just
Absolutely.
consider. Oh, it's important to consider
Hmm.
X, Y, or Z.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So I'm curious, is it best to break down with age group again, or just a global clinical consideration list for working with women who have codependency?
Yeah, I think we could do a global list, just
Let's do
things to think
global.
about,
Yeah,
because it can show up in any phase, any season. Right? So,
apparently.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
one of the things that you want to consider and think about is understanding the context that there is a function for the behaviors, right? And so, what I mean by that is sometimes when we're working in therapy, right, as a practitioner, we might see that a relationship is unhealthy or problematic. And at the same time, for this client, for their experience, this is what they're in. This is their real life, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are aspects of this relationship maybe that are working for them. And so clinically, you want to consider that number one, oftentimes it may be deeper than what's available to the eye, right? Two is you want to consider safety.
Mm-hmm.
In this relationship, does this person feel safe to say no, to set boundaries? And what happens when they do, right? So you want to consider safety precautions. Are they in a potentially abusive relationship? Right?
Mm-hmm.
You also want to consider somebody's coping skills and trauma background, right? Because there's elements in our relationships that can be triggers for other things. And so if I've experienced trauma, lots of stress, maybe the coping skills I use may not always be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I'm working with someone that also struggles with substance use or abuse. Right? And that's something to consider.
Right. oh, the vaping and overeating and
Mhm.
overspending that my patients engage in, right? To
Mhm.
cope with when they're triggered. Obviously, yeah, like past traumas potentially come up in their relationships that are, yeah, way deeper than I
Mhm.
potentially understand. That, yeah, despite seeing how much they're not working, are working for them.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
That it can be difficult to let go of and begin to change these behaviors. And I think that's a really, it seems simple, but it can also be very, very powerful to remember that
Right.
in the therapeutic relationship, right? That this can be a slow work when it comes to some of these behaviors, how rigid they are. How do we increase flexibility?
Right.
How ingrained are they? Where did I learn them? What are the benefits? What do I gain?
Right.
And that can be a slow work.
Mhm.
And
All
even
right.
looking out too, even looking out for that therapeutic relationship, right? That a therapist and their client can work through is, are there codependent behaviors that show up? And what are some more helpful ways to navigate that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I had a therapist. We were terminating, and I have talked about this before, but she asked the question verbatim. She structured it like, I know codependency is an aspect of your life that we've been working on and
Mhm.
improving.
Mhm.
Have you noticed any codependency in our relationship?
Mm.
And I really, underneath all of my initiation of terminating with her, was because I was like, oh my God, we are so codependent. Like I can't
Mm.
keep doing this. This isn't helping.
Yeah.
And when she asked, do you notice that in our relationship? I was like, nope, nope, nope.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes.
Right. I'm so codependent and so terrified of saying this for so many deeper reasons. And it serves me so much. This is the actual non-conflict is really working for me.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm just
Yes.
I'll keep that going. And now I'll deal with it with my next therapist.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. So even the
yeah,
work, like you said, the work that you're doing, it's a tough thing, right?
yeah.
I can have a goal. Hey, I want to be less in my relationships, have less codependent behaviors. And that takes time, that takes practice, right? And having that self-compassion and then compassion in the work is so, so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
it's a slow work.
Okay. So just for everyone's review, Dr. Janelle is saying clinically, we need to consider understanding the, oh gosh, I can't even put, but there is a function for the behaviors, right? For the codependent behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that, it's important to one, know that you said maybe, it is deeper. It's deeper. So knowing that there's depth. Second, it's important to consider safety, right? Is there safety in the relationships emotionally, physically, etc.? We need to consider coping skills, trauma background, and how difficult change really is. So needing to be flexible, right? It's a slow work. And then also consider codependency within the therapeutic relationship. Yeah, which
Yes.
can totally
Yes.
be there. Any other thoughts on those 6.5-ish considerations?
No, I think those are a part of it, right? And there's always so many others, but I think these are some of the important ones to think about, especially when getting started or deciding,
Mhm.
hey, I'm going to start doing this work
Right.
with a therapist. Mm.
And I, you know, hearing you, Dr. Janelle, talking about codependency through the lifespan, these clinical considerations, right? The hope is that many of the listeners have been, plan to be, or will be in therapy at some point in their
Mhm.
lives, whether it's individual, group, support groups, there's Codependents Anonymous, some type of um yeah, like real like support in their healing journey. I tend to ask about the long-term consequences of unaddressed codependency, but yeah, I was preparing today and I was like, I want to ask Dr. Janelle about what are the long-term benefits of addressing it now, right? So if this adolescent goes to therapy, so she doesn't turn into a young woman, new mom, codependent,
Mhm.
what are some of the benefits you've observed in addressing these patterns now?
Yeah, there's so many benefits, right? When it comes to specifically looking at how important our relationships are for our well-being, especially when I think about like being women, right? Relationships are such a big part of that well-being, right? Across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at what others determine to be important in their well-being. And that's one of the big ones. And
Right.
so some of the benefits are really having authentic, deeper connections in those relationships. Safety, security, right? Feeling more safe, more secure in their attachments, in their relationships across the board. Feeling higher levels of well-being because they're not self-abandoning for the sake of someone else, but they are engaging in interdependence where they're caring for themselves while at the same time receiving from others as well
Mm-hmm.
and giving. It's a interplay that happens. And so
Right.
feeling more fulfilled, more secure, higher levels of happiness, right? More positive emotions, having more space and energy to focus on the things that are valuable and important to them in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Because when our relationships have gone awry or are negative or not fulfilling, that can impact a lot of other aspects of our lives. It's not in a vacuum, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really not.
Mhm.
It's a ripple. It's not a
Yes.
vacuum. It's the opposite. Yeah. I
Yes.
think, yeah, looking back, I really thought if I'm, in a toxic dating relationship, a toxic friendship, a toxic
Hmm.
work environment where I am engaged in a lot of codependent patterns, I remember I wouldn't tell my friends or
Hmm.
family about my relationship. I just
Yeah.
wouldn't talk about how it was going. And then it's a vacuum, right? Or again, same thing, like maybe I have a friend and everyone else had an issue with her, but they didn't understand her.
Hmm.
And again, I would just go spend time with her, not tell anyone, and think it was a vacuum, but that impacted those relationships. They do.
Yeah.
They impact my body, they impact my time.
Yes.
Yeah, how I feel about myself. And then the quality of my other relationships,
Hmm.
if I'm not sharing. And so, yeah, here you are. Like this is just I'm like I think every codependent is drooling at this list if we deal with this now. Dr. Janelle says we have more authentic, deeper connections.
Mhm.
We feel safe and secure in our relationships. We have a higher sense of well-being, right? Reciprocity, interdependence in our relationships. Feel more fulfilled, positive emotions.
Yeah.
We're in alignment with our values.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't have to keep manifesting as
Exactly.
life continues. Yeah.
Exactly. And everything that we just talked about in that list, lots of benefits interpersonally, right? Psychologically, emotionally, and I'm thinking physiologically, right? What we know about chronic stress and increasing the risk factors of cardiovascular incidents and high blood pressure, diabetes, right? That when we're experiencing chronic stress, there's lots of physiological aspects and consequences to that stress. And so stress is not just, physical, but also, interpersonal stress, relational stress, right? That impacts as well. So
Right.
taking care of this now has not only those interpersonal and mental health benefits, but also the physiological benefits as well.
Right. It's a ripple, taking care of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The whole person, right?
Mhm.
Integrated.
Cascades. All right. Well, if a listener is wanting to experience those benefits with you,
Mhm.
Dr. Janelle, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find us by visiting our website at www.womenrisepsychandwellness.com. You can also visit us on Instagram at womenrisepsych_wellness. And you can give us a call at 909-294-7012 to learn more about our services. And you can also email us at info@womenrisepsychandwellness.com.
Okay. And the
So lots of
number
different ways to connect.
909-294-7042.
7012.
Okay.
Mhm.
7012, everyone. Okay. I will put links to all of those in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on to talk with us.
You are so welcome. Thank you again, Marissa, for having me. I am so just so excited about all the listeners where they are on their own journeys of healing. And I'm glad that you're doing this, and best wishes to everyone as they grow and heal. And I hope you rise.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please